The tragic case of Nicole Tuxford shocked the community of Christchurch, revealing a history of obsession that stemmed from an inability to handle rejection and would forever change the lives of those involved. On April 7, 2018, at 8 a.m., an electrician arrived at a house in Maraville, Christchurch, New Zealand, to fix a switchboard. He rang the doorbell but got no answer. After checking his schedule, he was sure he was at the right house. He tapped on a bedroom window but still got no response. But he heard a faint noise coming from inside the house, which made him feel uncomfortable. Despite this, he brushed off the feeling, thinking it might just be a missed appointment. He decided to leave and continue with his other tasks and return later. At 11:40 a.m., the electrician came back and knocked again, but no one answered. He noticed a window was open, so he looked inside. Feeling uneasy, he climbed through the window to enter the house. Inside, he discovered the lifeless body of a woman. Though shaken, he quickly called the authorities to report what he had found. The police arrived shortly afterward and identified the woman as Nicole Tuxford. Upon investigating the scene, they found that she had been essayed and sustained serious neck injuries, including deep cuts. There were also signs of strangulation, along with bruising on her face and defensive wounds on her arms, suggesting she had fought back. The case had similarities to a crime from 1994 that had deeply shocked the close-knit community of Hokitika. Meanwhile, at Christchurch Hospital, a crucial link to the case was uncovered. A man who had been admitted after crashing a car was found to be connected to Nicole, as the vehicle was registered to her. The man who gave his name as Paul Tainoi had previously been known as Paul Wilson. Paul had connections to another controversial figure in New Zealand, David Bain, who was acquitted of the murders of his family after a high-profile second trial. Interestingly, Paul served as a groomsman at David Bain's wedding. Joe Karam, a strong supporter of David Bain's innocence, considered Paul his oldest and closest friend. David and Paul grew close while working together in a prison kitchen. However, Paul's name was linked to a darker past in Hokitika. Paul Wilson grew up in Hokitika with his mother, Diane, and father, Ernie, who separated when he was young. He worked at Westland Milk Products and was part of the Kiwi Rugby Club. In 1989, he started dating Kim Schroeder, who was 10 years younger. They lived together, but in 1992, Kim ended the relationship because of Paul's controlling behavior. This deeply upset him, and he sought sympathy from the community, portraying himself as a victim of her decision. Tensions increased when Paul confronted Kim at the Westland Hotel. Fueled by jealousy and possessiveness, he insisted on knowing her whereabouts, but she refused to share any details, which led to a heated situation. Kim's cousin, Bruce, and his friends stepped in, but Paul returned with a shotgun, attempting to force Kim to speak. When Bruce tried to intervene, Paul pointed the gun at him, but the gun did not go off. Bruce and others were able to wrestle it away from Paul before anything worse could happen. Despite this, the community in Hokitika rallied around Paul, with many supporting him. Paul was sentenced to 10 months in prison for assault and firearm possession, but this was just one of many troubling incidents. After serving 5 months of his sentence, he was granted early release due to his good behavior. In 1993, Paul harbored hopes of rekindling his relationship with Kim, despite her moving on with a new partner. His obsession grew, and he began lurking around her home at night, listening to her private moments with her new partner. One night, his jealousy reached a breaking point, and he showed up at Kim's house and struck her. Despite this, Kim chose not to press charges, perhaps hoping to avoid further conflict. By 1994, Kim, now an office manager, wanted to escape Paul's constant presence. She applied for jobs outside Hokitika for safety. Her parents, unaware of Paul's obsession, remained kind to him, which would later have tragic consequences. On May 17, 1994, Paul, under false pretenses, gained entry to Kim's home with the help of her flatmate, Sean Riley. Once inside, he held Riley hostage at knife point, tying him up and silencing him. Paul hid in Sean's room and waited for Kim to return home. Once Kim entered the house, she went about her evening, making tea and watching TV. When she went to her room, Paul emerged and confronted her. then went on to violently attack her. Even though Kim begged for mercy, Paul continued his attack. He inflicted serious injuries to her hand during the struggle. He then essayed her and ultimately slashed her throat. During this horrific ordeal, Riley was forced to listen, a trauma that would have lasting effects. Ironically, on the same day, Kim's mother Nancy had shown an act of kindness towards Paul by gifting him a hand-knitted jersey. The following day, Paul confessed his actions to his family and encouraged them to notify the authorities. The news shocked those who knew him as it seemed out of character. During his trial, Paul admitted to the crime but denied he essayed Kim and said it was consensual. Ultimately, he was sentenced to life in prison. Years later, as Paul became eligible for parole, the family of the victim voiced concerns about his potential release. Despite these concerns, Paul was eventually granted parole. After his release, he changed his last name and tried to move on with his life. But the past actions remained a source of unease for those who had known him. Paul's parole was conditional, requiring him to stay away from substances and limit his alcohol consumption. Surprisingly, his conditions did not mandate that he inform authorities about any interactions with women unless he became involved with them. Psychologists later identified that Paul's violent behavior stemmed from his inability to handle feelings of abandonment, leading him to lash out when those emotions were triggered, a pattern often linked to psychopathy. In 2016, Paul met Nicole Tuxford at a scrapyard where they both worked. Nicole was 25 years old, almost half Paul's age. She had recently moved to Christchurch after high school. She was a compassionate, upbeat person with dreams of becoming a counselor and was training to be a life coach. Although Paul's workplace knew he was a convicted murderer, they did not share details about his potential risks to women. Soon, Paul began showing up uninvited at Nicole's house, often giving vague reasons for his presence. This behavior made Nicole uncomfortable, prompting her to lock her doors and avoid him when he arrived unexpectedly. She spoke to her friends about her concerns but didn't involve the authorities, thinking it was just a phase. The situation worsened when Paul started trespassing on her property, offering to do electrical work or provide items he claimed she needed. Her boss eventually took notice of Paul's inappropriate actions and issued a warning, followed by a meeting to address his behavior. Paul, feeling angry, initially quit his job but later decided to reverse his decision and stay. Despite these warning signs, Paul's parole officers were only informed of a minor workplace conflict and weren't made aware of his troubling behavior towards Nicole. Paul also threatened to burn down Nicole's home after she made it clear that she wanted to keep their relationship platonic. Nicole eventually left her job at the scrapyard to pursue a career at the Phoenix Light Foundation, becoming a life coach. Just 2 weeks before her tragic death, she invited Paul to her home for a brief drink to help him as a life coach. She set a time limit of 90 minutes for their meeting. However, Paul wanted more time, which made Nicole reassert her boundaries. When Paul discovered that Nicole was in a relationship, he became upset and expressed his anger in a text message. During this time, Paul presented a false image of progress to his parole officer, claiming his career was doing well, that he was drinking less and focusing on self-improvement. In reality, he was struggling with heavy drinking and unlawful substance activities in exchange for sexual favors. On April 6, 2018, Paul was at a bar and after consuming alcohol, made his way to Nicole's house. He was stopped by police at a roadblock for drunk driving, where officers seized 2 knives from his vehicle. Despite his high blood alcohol level, he was allowed to leave, as there was no system in place to check his identity or parole status, nor did they know about his past crime with knives. Later that night, Paul took a taxi to Nicole's home. He arrived at her house around 11 p.m. and after entering the house, he waited for 8 hours until Nicole returned the following morning at 7:40 a.m. Nicole returned to her house, unaware of the danger lurking. Paul waited for her to settle in before attacking. Just like he did 24 years earlier, he threatened her with a knife, tied and gagged her, and essayed her. Nicole fought back fiercely, biting, struggling, and kicking with defensive wounds on her arms. At this time, the electrician arrived and rang the doorbell but only heard muffled sounds, which turned out to be Nicole stomping, attempting to get his attention. Sadly, he left without entering the house. Nicole didn't survive the ordeal that followed. Paul overpowered her, punched her, and further restrained her with her own scarf and tape. Eventually, he ended her life in the same brutal manner as he did with Kim Schroeder 24 years ago. Paul fled the scene in Nicole's Toyota but crashed the car after experiencing a seizure. Paul was taken to a hospital following the crash, and upon checking his identity, authorities connected him to the incident and his past. They arrested him shortly after. Nicole's family was devastated by the news, unaware of Paul's violent history, which had not been disclosed to them. The news of Paul's actions again shocked Kim Schroeder's family, leaving them in a state of disbelief and deep sorrow. They had repeatedly voiced their concerns to authorities but felt their warnings were ignored. They had always believed Paul should not have been released on parole, especially given his previous actions. Their efforts to prevent his release seemed to have gone unnoticed, which added to their heartbreak. Reports later revealed that Paul had been openly discussing his past actions when he was out on parole without remorse, where he openly bragged about murdering his former girlfriend. He even expressed regret for not killing her partner as well. During the trial, the prosecution aimed to ensure Paul would never be released from prison. However, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 28 years. He was 55 when this happened, which meant he wouldn't be eligible for parole until his 80s. In response to this case, New Zealand introduced changes to its police systems, creating an offender registry that would alert authorities if a parolee was involved in any criminal activity. This reform aimed to help prevent similar situations from occurring. The tragic deaths of Nicole Tuxford and Kim Schroeder serve as a chilling reminder of the dangers posed by unchecked obsession and the importance of vigilant monitoring to protect the safety of all. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel for more true crime content. See you next time.